This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. Dan O'Brien, K-State grain economist, begins today's show with his grain market outlook. He takes a look into the current issues domestically and internationally that are impacting the market. Continuing the show is K-State's Sarah Lancaster and Tina Sullivan as they discuss Musk Thistle and how it can be controlled. We also take the time to introduce Tina to Kansas farmers and ranchers. A weather update with K-State meteorologist Chip Redmond ends the show as he explains the continued dry conditions and if he sees rain in the forecast. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Friday show with the grain market update with K-State grain economist Dan O'Brien. Dan, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Shelby.
Dan, we're around corn harvest right now, and we're not seeing the lows we usually do, and why is that?
Well, in September, when the main focus of the market was on the size of the crop, that we had the USDA report came out and showed 183 bushel plus corn yields, by far a record, and also for soybean yields, 53 bushel plus. So, and really now what we're doing as we speak, we're at the end of the time period when the USDA NASS has gone out into the fields with their own enumerators to look at test plots to bring information in that they'll bring into that crop production report on October the 11th coming up. So that's really the next, really, as far as USDA supply demand data, that's the next bit of that information that'll be coming into the market. So possibility of a fair amount of volatility. And we have heard mixed reports on yields. Some places astoundingly good, others more mixed. It really so much depends on where you're at. So still uncertainty in the USDA track record, even their own published track record, they talk about how changes can occur. So that's an issue. And if that was the only thing that we were dealing with, just the size of the crops, then we kind of slowly languish our way off into harvest lows and that are just pictured in our minds by trucks lined up at elevators or outside of different receiving points or on the farm, filling grain bins and with that great volume of grain around for corn, soybeans, sorghum, sunflowers, you name it, other Kansas crops, we would see a lot of pressure on prices. At least the basis would widen out just because we're trying to manage storage space. But we have some other issues that have come in the last several weeks that have added questions into the market. And I can think of several of them. Domestically, we have had a dock strike, adding questions to, at least in the grain markets, how much will that affect us? So we can come back and talk about that. We've had this major storm, Helena, whichever, the one that hit Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, other Tennessee, other of those states, which caused a lot of infrastructure damage. We talk about that a little bit. And then we have these overseas issues that are ongoing in the case of the Black Sea region. It's a hot war. It's a shooting war. And that added to drought in those areas is diminishing the supplies available of wheat to the market that are coming out and adding support to wheat prices. And the Middle East conflict, dealing with the Israel, Hamas, Iran, other players, adding fear in the energy markets that if that conflict broadens, that we could see a disruption of oil supplies. And now when you see how much in the United States for corn, for soybeans and canola, other crops that were dependent on bioenergy production, now if there's a run up or any type of a spike in the oil market and the energy markets for petroleum, that comes back on the biofuel side and adds a lot and could add a lot of support, a lot of demand coming in. And on the U.S. side, I guess, with the nation, frankly, looking towards biofuels to make up the difference for any at least temporary disruptions in oil supplies coming in. So we'll see. I just want to go back and mention one or two of those things. On the with regard to the port strike, still unresolved as we speak on this. At least if there is an agreement that comes about, it's not signed yet. We'll see what happens. Things can always change the last second. But it's thought to be more of an issue with container shipments than it is for bulk grain. Still, disruptions of one type or another, not so much of a problem, I think, in the Pacific Northwest. I think there was a similar strike that was happening up in Canada, Vancouver area, and supposedly that one's resolved. But for anything going to the Gulf, to parts of the East and West Coast, then you have this potential disruption. Of course, a lot of our grain, if it doesn't go to the Pacific Northwest, it's going down the Gulf generally, or by rail into Mexico. Mexico's a huge buyer. So as we had seen reports of how price of rail transportation in anticipation of this strike and now living it is also being affected. So that whole transportation system gets disrupted to some degree. So we'll see. By the time we get in at the very heart of harvest, if we're not able to move grain freely down the river system or elsewhere, then yeah, that would add even more to harvest loads. So you got that. And then the hurricane that's come in and has really damaged any unharvested crops that are in the field, or if they were in a grain bin, heaven forbid, that had the bottom affected by rising water levels, then you've got a lot of spoilage, a lot of disruption. I haven't heard anybody talk a lot. Well, I've heard some discussion about livestock facilities being impacted, and in Georgia, 100 some poultry units, and of course, North Carolina is a major contract livestock production area too, but I've heard no discussion of that. So I guess the ability to move grain in or out of that area in the Carolinas, I think it's mainly going in, to keep the livestock feeding facilities going is a real issue. So we'll see. I had understood that about 70% of the crops in North Carolina, Tennessee were already harvested. So you got the back half of that. Whether they can now move that into channels will be an issue. So you got that. Go back and talk about the Black Sea region issue. As you'd mentioned just a few minutes ago, that dry conditions are leading at least Russia to state that they're looking at constraining some of their export numbers. Of course, they've had a run of several years in a row of tremendous crops, and some of the land that was in contention in that war, in the Donbas areas, I believe that's how it's pronounced, they have expanded into those areas for their national crop production. So got all that going on, but Russia for a good while has been able to sell wheat at I wouldn't say fire sale levels, but definitely by their location, lower prices, able to kind of dominate that market. Well, now they've got a drought, much less everything else that's going on. And reports in the last several days of Russia via drone attacks coming at or doing damage to the port of Odessa, which is the key primary port location for shipping for Ukraine. So nothing getting easier over there in terms of keeping wheat going. And finally, in the Black Sea area, we mentioned that just a little bit ago. I don't know yet that it doesn't sound like with everything else that's been attacked back there, I don't know that they've seen damage, at least as we speak, to any energy facilities. But if that happens, that could cause a lot of volatility, a lot of uncertainty to come into world oil markets, and would come right back in to affect U.S. agriculture to the degree that any shortfalls in exports or spikes in prices that would occur in that part of the world would come back and affect biodiesel, renewable diesel, ethanol production. So ethanol profitability has been really very, very good for a good while because of cheap corn prices. Well, if in this situation, you'd see ethanol prices move higher as well as moderate corn prices, as probably at least moderately higher corn prices. So I think these issues are important to Kansas farmers as they're out in the fields and pulling the harvest in, making decisions whether to sell at harvest or to store. Some of the prices they've seen in a little bit less bit of time have come up 30, 40 cents. Maybe that's, if it ties in with cash flow needs, probably an opportunity to sell. But we have other issues. These other issues afoot they at least add the likelihood of more riskiness in coming months in the market. And the normal things that we're worried about, drought in Brazil, that's still out there. The things we've mentioned haven't even have now taken front and center attention in the markets, whereas we're still wondering about delayed planting and extremely dry conditions in parts of South America that are our main export competitors. So, this isn't the docile harvest period where we just wonder, what in the world do we ever do with this grain? That's not the situation that we're in. Now we've been kind of blessed in a lot of areas with a pretty good crop and are wondering what in the world's happening or what may happen in these international financial, energy, and agricultural markets that could affect our returns to storage. So we'll see. We'll see where we go in coming days and months.
And Dan, just real fast, as we round out today's show, with all these concerns domestically and internationally, can you run us through prices?
Yesterday, Thursday, October the 3rd, Dees corn closed at $4.2825, and that's up about 20 cents or so from where we had been. There were times we were at 4 or below. November soybeans, $10.46, and again, that's up a fair amount from where we had been. Even wheat is now trading at $6.11 and a half. That's what it closed on at yesterday for Kansas City wheat, and that's markedly higher than where we'd been of late. So that's moderately reflective of these risks, and it's reflective of risks that haven't hit home yet. It's the fear of them coming. So got that, and cash prices haven't changed a lot from where we've been in the past, other than you do see a spot cash price in Southwest Kansas, Garden City area, $4.73, and we've been markedly lower than that here of late. Even wheat prices now, you've got an over $6 cash wheat price in the Hutchinson area, and we've been far lower than that here in recent weeks.
Dan, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today and give us our grain market update.
Thank you, Shelby. I appreciate it.
That was K-State grain economist Dan O'Brien. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but stick around because we have more for you up ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our Friday show introducing a new K-State Northeast area agronomist, Tina Sullivan, as well as talking about Musk Thistle with Tina and K-State weed specialist, Sarah Lancaster. Tina, Sarah, thank you both so much for taking the time to join us today.
Thanks for the invitation, Shelby.
Tina, starting off with you, you are a new Northeast area agronomist, and what brought you into agriculture?
So I'm originally from Southeast Tennessee, so about an hour north of Chattanooga, in an area of Tennessee where we're really not known for anything but vegetable production and small cow-calf operations. I grew up on a small meat goat farm with all of the fields around us, either in hay or in tomato production. So if I wasn't wrestling a goat when I was younger, I was trying to carry a 5-gallon bucket full of tomatoes as far as I could, and then usually spilling said 5-gallon bucket of tomatoes. A little bit more about me. I went to University of Tennessee at Martin for my undergrad in ag engineering. Spent a lot of time in the South. Went back to work at the Tennessee Farmers Cooperative after my undergrad to kind of get some more agronomy knowledge. Decided then and there that working at the Farmers Co-op might not have been the best fit for me. Decided I wanted to go to grad school. Kind of got some suggestions from professors I really trusted at UT Martin. They said, if you're going to go to grad school, look for two things. Look for someone who's going to pay you to go to grad school and get out of the South. So I decided to get out of the South, as far away from the South as I could, and I went to Utah State University for my master's and my PhD, getting to work on a project where I was looking at the interaction of irrigation management and crop management. And with that project, really got to put some ag engineering, instead of on paper, in the field, and understand how irrigation management affects all of our cropping systems in Utah. And surprisingly, yes, they do grow crops in Utah.
From Tennessee to Utah, now to Kansas. Tina, what are you doing here?
Here in Kansas as a Northeast area agronomist, my position is being support to 31 counties. They're extension agents, and a lot of those counties are a district now. Also to help those extension agents with their agronomy needs. And for those agronomy needs, it can be the common crops of corn, soybean. Some of the area is wheat, even though people are like, well, it's Northeast Kansas, there's not much wheat. There's still wheat. And then I've been working a lot with forages as well.
Tina, great to get to know a little bit about you for our Kansas farmers and ranchers. And now wanting to talk about musk thistle, and it's a special weed, but not in a very good way, Sarah.
Yeah, so musk thistle, we were chatting before we started recording, Shelby. It's a very photogenic weed. It's beautiful, but it's problematic. It is actually one of the 12 noxious weeds in the state of Kansas. So by law, if we have musk thistle on our properties, we are required to take action to control that weed.
When you say photogenic, what does it look like?
So in the spring and summer, it produces very pretty sort of lavender, purple-y, pinky colored flowers, and it has very distinct bracts that just make it very, very attractive to look at. Those bracts are also spiny, Shelby, so we have to be careful if we're working around it.
Is it always easy to identify, or really when it has that flower on it?
Yeah, so I think thistle identification can be a little bit tricky when they're in the rosette stage. So musk thistle is a weed that's a biennial. So that means that in its first year, it's a rosette. So it's just a clump of leaves on the ground. And a lot of our thistles start out that way. So do a lot of our winter annuals, right? So musk thistle is starting to come up this time of year. You can see rosettes in pastures and other places that have musk thistle infestations now. So that's when it's hard to identify. For me, one of the key tells for identifying musk thistle when it's a rosette is kind of the pattern of the teeth around the leaf margin. They're pretty aggressive compared to things like bull thistle or Canada thistle. And also it is more waxy than those other thistles. And sometimes you can kind of see the wax deposits as a little white kind of outline around the leaf margins.
When it comes to control, mechanical control is one of those options. And does it matter what time of year people go out and pull up that thistle?
For mechanical control, time of year is not so much important as long as you're not letting it produce seed, right? So as long as it's still in the rosette stage or has the pink flowers, mechanical control is okay. But again, it's got those spines, so you got to be a little bit careful. I know I make my kids go out and dig the ones that show up on our property. And so it's like, PPE time, right? Long sleeves. That's the day they actually wear pants and gloves and things of that nature. But just removing the roots so that it can't regrow is the key.
So, Sarah, after that weed is pulled, making sure you're not just laying it right where it's at in the pasture?
Yeah, I think it's a good idea to get that out of the pasture. Number one, if you've got cattle grazing the pasture, right, the spines become a nuisance for the cattle. But number two, if you're removing the flowers, you want to make sure that any seeds that might be there are not landing back where we're trying to get rid of it.
Tina, anything to add?
I'm going to kind of take a step back to what Sarah was saying with not wanting to just lay the plant down when it is losing seed. That's one of the things about how competitive musk thistle can be is once the seeds will fall, they don't have to travel very far. They can become a pretty thick blanket of musk thistle. So trying to really control seed drop, so just removing the full plant. And if there is musk thistle and say it's in a grazed area, just because it's there does not mean livestock are going to eat it. They don't typically like to have their nose bump up against the spines. So thinking of it as, well, the livestock will eat it and control it is not an option either.
And Tina, what about for chemical control?
When it comes to chemical control, we do have a few options. For fall applications, 2,4-D LVE at 2 pounds per acre was typically seen as as more effective, so 80% control, compared to similar rates of 2,4-D amine, which was only at 49% control. Other options include dicamba plus 2,4-D amine plus Tordon. There's also a effective control option with research showing about above 90% control for musk thistle when treated in the fall. And then other herbicide programs include Milestone and Chaparral. Products containing Milestone and Tordon will not only control the rosettes treated in the fall, but also have enough carryover to control emerging seedlings with the following spring.
So really good to go out and get things sprayed this time of year on warm, sunny days?
Yeah, so, the key to post-emergence weed control with herbicides is the plant has to be actively growing, right? And so warm, sunny days are going to be the best. And we're having a lot of those right now, Shelby. What I can see from the forecast, it looks like we should have a lot of those going forward. So as crops continue to mature, trees continue to mature, and we reduce the risk of that off-target movement causing injury, we're going to have a lot of good spray days for pasture maintenance this fall.
And one last option when it comes to control, biological.
Biological control is so tricky, Shelby. There are some weevils that can be used to control musk thistle. The key to biological control, though, is you have to have, number one, you have to have a species that's not going to jump to a desired plant, right? So we've got these weevils that are unique to the musk thistles. But the second key to these is you need to keep, if you want long-term use of these biologicals, you have to be able to tolerate enough of their host plant in the environment that they can continue to survive and reproduce. So you're striking a balance there. You're not really eradicating. So the weevils can be a help to get a big infestation under control. But as we think about managing smaller infestations, isolated plants, honestly, mechanical control is probably the best. And just going out and clipping seed heads or digging them. This time of year, you got to dig them to make sure that the rosettes don't grow back. Or spot spraying.
Sarah, Tina, I appreciate you both taking the time to join us today.
Thanks for having us, Shelby.
Yes, thank you.
That was K-State weed specialist Sarah Lancaster, and she was joined by K-State's Northeast area agronomist Tina Sullivan. You can read more about musk thistle by reading a recent Agronomy E-Update article titled Musk Thistle Control in the Fall. I will link it in today's show notes on agtoday.net. Before we cut to a break, we're now going to be joined by USDA's Rod Bain and Undersecretary for Farm Production and Conservation, Robert Bonney, as they discuss what some of the focus areas of the Agriculture Department are as part of the federal response and recovery efforts from Hurricane Helene.
We're still assessing the size of the impacts to agriculture and forestry. We know they're significant. We know there will be short-term impacts, and we also know that the impacts on farmer livelihoods will last for potentially years.
Agriculture Undersecretary for Farm Production and Conservation Robert Bonney, along with federal officials Tuesday, discussing recovery efforts in the aftermath of Hurricane Helene in the Southeast. USDA contribution in these efforts include non-ag focus on cleanup and food and nutrition security to those impacted, as well as farm-oriented areas such as standing up USDA service centers impacted by power loss or flooding from the storm, including emergency staffing to handle applications for assistance. Crop insurance and emergency conservation programs will also be a focus of USDA in post-Helene recovery efforts. I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but stick around because when we come back from our break, we'll be joined by K-State meteorologist Chip Redmond with this week's weather update. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we end our Friday show with a weather update with K-State meteorologist Chip Redmond. Chip, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Chip, this past week we've seen some pretty cool weather. Yeah,
we had temperatures after one of our fairly frequent cold fronts earlier this week. We had temperatures down into the mid-30s in some places, especially northwest Kansas and then some of the valleys in eastern Kansas a day later. That resulted in some areas of localized frost, and otherwise, that's really been the only real headline weather-wise over the last week. It's a very quiet week. We are in that time where we expect our first frost of the year, and we're actually running a little late for some folks. And then the freeze, too. I mean, Northwest Kansas should have already seen freeze by this point on average, late September, early October, and we didn't get to that point yet, so we likely push that off for at least another week. And despite the cool mornings, we have really dry air in place, so we've been able to warm those temperatures up really quickly. And so we might have been in the mid-30s, but we warmed up into the 80s those afternoons and even some 90s. And really big temperature swings as a result of these dry air, but it's been beautiful weather, sunny skies, and very few clouds. But it has been occasionally breezy.
Does that make a really dangerous combination when it comes to fire then?
This dry air has been in place for a long time. I mean, we're about a week and a half into this dry spell now, 2 weeks, and things were dry already before this, and even with the recent rainfall, a lot of the places that got a good amount of rain, it rained hard and it ran off, and it just didn't have long-term benefits in soil moisture and vegetation, mainly because of fall, too. Things are already naturally curing out as you get into fall with less sunlight. The grass is browning out a little easier, and the trees are starting to lose their leaves and change color. So all that combined with the dry conditions, and we add wind to it, and with warmer afternoons, we are starting to see some fire concerns. We've had several reported fires over the last week from combines and harvesting and associated activities. So fuels, especially the agriculture, the corn and soybeans, are really receptive right now to fire. And so if something goes wrong with a harvest in any way, shape, or form, you can get a fire starts really quickly, easily, and it'll be very hard to suppress just because it's been so dry. That stuff's going to burn really intensely. And we add some wind to it, it's going to be hard to stop. It's dangerous.
Chip, do we see any hope of rain in the forecast?
Yeah, so this weekend, we warm up rapidly on Saturday. We're going to get near record high temperatures in the mid to upper 90s in places. Combined with those winds, we're going to have fire weather concerns. We can see some winds out of the southwest at 35 miles an hour. We'll have a cold front go through Saturday afternoon and Saturday night. That'll cool things down for Sunday and Monday, but then temperatures cool things down relatively. We'll have highs in the mid-70s. That's about average, but our low temperatures just are not dropping. We should be in the mid-40s right now. We're barely getting below 50 degrees. As we move forward, the temperature will start climbing again. Overall, though, it's dry. I don't see a big change in the forecast. The high pressure is holding in place with these weak frontal systems. Then that's our biggest weather. And then we need a change, and we need a change in this pattern to get some moisture in here. And the way to do that is it's got to come from the Pacific, most likely, the West Pacific. We need a typhoon to get wrapped up into the jet stream and basically break that pattern down over the U.S. And right now, there's hints that there will be a system in about a week, but that means we're still 2 weeks out at least from that system. If it does get absorbed in the jet stream, changing our pattern to something more favorable for precipitation. So we're 2 weeks out from that. Dry conditions will persist, and overall, warmer than normal temperatures will persist as well.
As we've been talking about fire weather, is there anything you'd like to remind our producers about?
Yeah, just be sure that you have maintenance up on your equipment, and you have fire extinguishers there and able to put out any fire if you do get a fire start. And, maybe on those really windy days, maybe don't push the issue and just let the combine sit. We have a long period of dry conditions, so you'll have another chance to get in the field. So just a couple preventative things you can do to mitigate fires in cropland.
Chip, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Yep, thanks for having me.
That was K-State meteorologist Chip Redmond. That's all we have for you this week on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more for you on Monday.